My pronouns are he, him. My name's Jonny. Nice to meet you all. Thank you for being here. First, I wanted to begin by saying something I want to admit. Because this is my first XOXO. I was at all the talks yesterday, and I saw the arcades and the tabletops, and I've never felt more like an imposter in my entire life. And I just wanted to shout out to Imposter Syndrome. I just wanted to raise your hand if you feel sort of like a bit of an imposter, if you felt a bit of like a fraud. Okay, great. So let's do a repeat after me. I am not an imposter. I'm not an imposter. I deserve to be here. I'm good at what I do. I deserve to take up space. And I will take up space. And maybe I'm the one person here who actually is an imposter, and then everyone's going to find out, and I'm the one who, there was a mistake that I was here. Don't repeat that. That's just in my head. But I did want to show this next slide. This is from my book, and this is the best way I could describe imposter syndrome, which was naturally to write it from the voice of an owl. And the owl says, who am I? I don't really know. Everybody calls me wise, and I've tried to learn very much about the world, but I don't feel very wise. And I know that owls are supposed to be wise, so then I don't feel owl enough to be an owl. I feel like one day I'll meet another owl, and they'll take one look at me and say, oh, somebody made a mistake. You're not supposed to be an owl at all. And so the reason I'm here partially is because I'm the author and illustrator of this book, Everyone's an Alien When You're an Alien Too. Partially because I've been on Twitter for 6-7 years now, and I think I've become sort of a bit of a known entity, and I've been really interested in online communities, and partially because I'm studying this stuff in school. My PhD is at MIT, and I just finished my qualifying exams. Thank you. And I'm interested in online communities, and I'm interested in the internet as a place, and how all that stuff kind of mixes together. And when the Andes asked me to speak, their pitch was sort of like, you are talking to your people right now. Like, we are all internet creatives or people who work online or who live online. And I thought this was such a cool, rare experience to get to sort of already, to not have to preface this with explaining what Twitter is or explaining what social media is. You all know that stuff. And so I just wanted to talk a bit about my experiences as a creative person who works on the internet. And just to preface this, I'm not going to talk about Trump. You just have to imagine that all of this is with the acknowledgement of all this stuff happening in the background. And I wanted to shout out Cameron's talk in the opening keynote and say that for marginalized folks, this has always been the backdrop, right? And this has always been the environment from which art is made and from which work is done. And I think even when it's not explicitly about it, art is always about making your time on this earth easier to survive, right? It's a survival thing. And art's about finding ways to get by in a world that doesn't necessarily care about you or that actively is against you. And so I've been thinking about that a lot, and I wrote this tweet that I think sums up maybe partially how I feel right now, which is that some art heals, some art soothes, some art shouts out and screams and yells, some art just tries to help the days go by a little faster. And whatever it is you're making, it doesn't need to do everything. And whatever art is moving you, just allow it to be what it needs to be and keep going. So that's for all of you making art and stuff. That's, I wanted to shout you out. So with that, I wanted to talk a bit about a few things that I found myself caring about a lot. And the first one is community. And this is something I've been thinking about a lot, and I think the mantra I've landed on at this moment is this idea that to make community is to seek community. So when I joined Twitter, it was in 2011, 2010, and the whole point of it for me was I used to be a comedy writer in Toronto, and I used to perform sketch comedy and do improv with my friends. And I moved to the US, and I sort of immediately lost that community. I didn't have that room to have fun and to write with people. And I turned to the internet to look for this feeling of being in a writer's room. And I found this community called, quote, Weird Twitter, unquote, if anyone's heard of Weird Twitter before. It's a community of cartoon Twitter people that were telling surreal jokes through text. And it was this cool feeling because it was this community where I felt like I was, again, just in a room making jokes with my friends, and we could talk to each other and bounce ideas off of each other and just have fun again. And so that was then, and maybe now it's a little more like, at this point, logging onto Twitter is basically like holding someone's hand at the end of the world. But I think it's kind of important to acknowledge both, right? And I think Weird Twitter is all but sort of disappeared now, and it's kind of splintered off and broken. And I think as you spend more time on the internet, and as you as you spend more time online and you spend more time with communities, you see that communities are amorphous and fluid, and sometimes they grow and sometimes they dissipate or splinter off. And I think the most important thing that you can do as a member of a community is to constantly be seeking it, and to seek it genuinely. And that's hard, but I think it's important to find that continued interest in looking for people, because that's what communities are, right? We're trying all to find places where we belong, and our interests kind of meet with other people's interests. And with that, you build community, or you uplift community, and you support it. And I think the thing I wanted to say about community on the internet as well is that, it's real. And that, I think, is kind of like a silly thing to say, but I really want to emphasize the idea that what's online is real. The internet is real. And I know I'm preaching to the choir because we're all here because of the internet, but I think as someone who works online a lot, and I think as we all do, I feel like we all face this daily attitude of, it's just the internet. It's just online stuff. It's not really real. And I just wanted to push back on that and say, the relationships we form here, or that we form online, are real relationships. They're legitimate. And you see that, for example, here at XOXO, or any time you meet an online friend in real life, right? I think there's this cool shared experience of kind of getting to meet someone that you followed for a long time, and you don't really have that awkward first date thing. You kind of you skip those 2 or 3 awkward moments, and you just jump into an existing conversation because that's what it is. And that affirms this idea that what we're doing is real, and all this stuff that's happening online is real. And once you realize that what's online is real, you realize that the internet is a place for working out who you are. Right? There's the version of yourself that you put online, I think, is real and legitimate too. And so much of the internet has helped me work on who I am, and has given me a place to sort of figure out a lot of my identity work. Or, as I put in the book, I'm like an onion. Peel back the layers, and you'll see that deep down inside, I'm just a smaller, more afraid onion. And I think there's truth to that. I think there's this idea of sort of uploading yourself onto the internet and seeing how your personality comes through, and seeing and figuring out who you are by writing and testing out and posting and building your identity up that way. And I know there's a lot of talk about facades and people who try to brand themselves and the masks that we can wear. And I think I'm less interested in the people who do that and who sort of use the internet to go viral or whatever. And I care more about it in terms of identity and identity building. And the idea that what you put online is supposed to be representative or aspirational to who you want to be. And then that becomes part of who you are, right? And the idea I keep coming back to, and I keep circling, and finding out that's really important to me, is this idea of centering the outsider. A lot of my work, my Twitter avatar is this little alien fellow, this alien, and I think as I've spent more time online and as I've been writing more, I've kind of inhabited this idea of the outsider, and I think a lot of that is through being an Asian American and this idea that Asian Americans are perpetual foreigners, and I've always felt like the outsider looking in, and I've never found a place for myself. I've never found a place where I felt like I belonged. And so when I started writing jokes on the internet and I started kind of figuring out my identity online, I really centered that. I wanted to talk about the stuff that makes you feel different. I wanted to talk about the stuff that makes you feel like an outsider, or that made me feel like an outsider. So all this stuff about loneliness and my anxiety and depression and my mental health and all this personal stuff that made me feel different and weird and strange. And what I learned about tweeting like that and sort of putting that out into the world is that one of the powers of the internet is making us realize that we're all outsiders, but we're all outsiders together. And I think the thing that makes us feel the loneliest, that makes us feel the weirdest and most different, you can tweet something about that, or you can post about it, and you'll see other people kind of come in and say, this is how I feel too. And I think there's a lot of power in taking that feeling that's inside and externalizing it as something else, and externalizing it as this thing that's outside of yourself that now other people can say, oh, I feel that way too. And then it goes from something that makes you feel strange to this cool shared experience. You know what I mean? And so I put that in the book too, and my thesis on that is the comforting thing about feeling lonely is that everything that's ever existed also knows what loneliness feels like too. And the idea that, again, loneliness is maybe the most universal experience we have, and the internet is this way that we can all sort of come together and agree on that. And looking at this page, it makes me think a lot about how a lot of my work is under the guise of humor and of comedy, and that and maybe it's like post-humor or post-comedy or some irony, humor, meta thing. But I think that through this sort of lens of humor, you can get to interesting places like this. And so I've been thinking a lot about lately this idea of humor being a Trojan horse. And that's kind of something that I've incorporated in a lot of my practice lately. And when I say being the Trojan horse, what I really mean is, we're all more than one thing, right? We are all complex and different and interesting, and we all know that, but at the same time, I think when we meet someone else, it's in our nature and it's in our, we can't help but initially let someone in by thinking about them as a one-liner, right? And so when we all sort of meet each other and you place one line to describe them, and I think it's important to kind of take that one-liner and take that way in and then build upon that and add complexity and sort of be a Trojan horse for all these other ideas and all these things you want to expand upon. So I'm aware, for example, that my Twitter account is seen ostensibly as a humor account, right? It has a cartoon avatar. I write funny things on there enough that people will classify me an easy one-liner as a humor account. And I've also built a following from that, and I think with that audience comes a certain responsibility. Right? And one of those things that I do to try to become a Trojan horse is I retweet a lot of people who are way smarter than me talking about race and activism and social justice. And I think there's this cool thing that happens where, because someone follows me expecting memes and jokes and funny stuff, I get to create this discourse where it might not have been possible. And hopefully people stick around and they don't unfollow me. But I think we're doing okay on that. A few other examples of Trojan horses that I think are really interesting, one of them being Wholesome Memes. And yeah, shout out to Wholesome Memes. And I really like Wholesome Memes because I think it's this cool movement that took the language of memes, internet humor, and image macros and used it to open up a little bit of space to talk about mental health and to open up these conversations and to make it feel normal and normalized to talk about our feelings. So here's one that I did that kind of talks about social anxiety. Me before the party, okay, you got this. Just try to fit in. Don't turn into a big duck, you'll be fine. Which is incidentally how I felt all of last night. Or this one, which is kind of silly. I'm coming out of my cage, and I've been doing not so great. Yeah, not too great, actually. Really not that great. And I know this is kind of silly joke stuff, but I also think that getting ourselves to admit and to talk about not feeling that great is no small task, right? And if we can do it through humor and through memes, I say we should do it. And I say we should try to find ways to do it in as many ways as possible, in as many ways as we can, including this. Thank you. And another kind of aspect of that I've found myself kind of really gravitating towards is this idea of tweeting about therapy. Yeah, shout out to therapy. and tweeting about mental health and self-care and all this stuff because before, like firsthand experience, before the internet, I didn't know that mental health was like a thing that could be applied to me, if that makes sense. Like I was raised in a household where like I didn't know that like anxiety and depression was for Asian people, I guess. I didn't know it was something that like could affect someone like me, and it wasn't until I started following people on Twitter and seeing all this discussion on the internet that was being talked about in a non-stigmatized way and just a normalized way of people sharing their experiences with mental health that it helped me realize that, oh, maybe that applies to me too, and that's the reason I got a therapist, and that's the reason why I started sort of making my mental health healthier. And so I feel like it's my responsibility now to try to give back a bit on that. And one of the ways in doing that is just normalizing kind of tweeting about my therapist. So here's a joke I wrote. Wow, therapy's so much easier if you just imagine you're a guest being interviewed on a podcast. And you know that feeling when you say something and your therapist just like starts writing and you're just like, oh, okay, I don't know what happened. Or this one, therapist saying, have you tried keeping a journal of all your worries and your fears? Me, is that like having a Twitter account no one can read? And again, this is fun, kind of like lighthearted, jokey stuff. But every once in a while, I get someone tweeting at me something like this. I've been wanting to see a therapist for a while because of my anxiety, but I've been too scared. But seeing that you go encouraged me to, and I just scheduled my first appointment for next week. And a lot of key smashing. And I think that's just really important, and it kind of just really makes me aware that words matter online. And that seems to be like another obvious thing to say, but I don't know if we realize that a lot of the times. But I really think that words matter, and the stuff that we tweet about and the stuff we put out into the world matters, and media matters, right? And it affects the way we think about things, and it affects society, and it affects the way, like our mentalities about everything. And another kind of example of words mattering and this Trojan Horse idea is I like to tweet about race sometimes, and I like to tweet about like my experiences as an Asian American person. And it's kind of interesting because my Twitter account doesn't have my face on it, right? My Twitter account is a cartoon alien. And so I think it's kind of fun because, well, luckily my name is Jonny Sun, which luckily sounds like a fake name anyway, and so people don't put the relationship together between like Jonny Sun and Asian name. And I think there's cool ways to have sort of disarming moments about race because people aren't following me necessarily because of that. And so I get to tweet stuff like this. The true Asian American experience is learning to jump in at the start of every interaction with a stranger with a precisely rehearsed aloofness, an impeccably casual, hey, how's it going? To break their immediate assumption that you don't speak English. Are there any Asian people in the audience who like who have felt that way and who kind of have that experience? Yeah, that's like, to me that's so cool because this is like this idea of centering this outsiderness. This was an experience that I've realized that I do a lot, and I didn't even know if other Asian people did it. I just tweeted it out, and I got all these people kind of responding and saying, oh yeah, I totally do this too. I thought I was the only one. You get other people kind of jumping in and adding to it. There's also a classic loudly talking to your companion with a very strong American accent to show that you do speak English. And it also kind of builds and builds. And it turns out that that's also not just an Asian experience, but also a Latinx one. So shout out to all my Latinx people in the audience. And I think it's kind of cool because this stuff, I've been thinking about tweets a lot as these things that create like little conversation spaces, right? Little places to kind of connect and share experiences and talk. And you form this little like ephemeral micro-community in the replies of a tweet sometimes, and it's a cool way to share experiences and learn. And that's sort of what a lot of my PhD work is trying to figure out is what type of place is the social internet, and what are the qualities of virtual online place. So one of those is thinking about the tweet and its replies as like this little town square. Another thing I've been thinking a lot about is the timeline as as this structure, or as this narrative structure, or as this like place that we all inhabit. Maybe like it's a giant chat room, or maybe it's kind of like a storybook or a news feed, and just understanding like how we picture that space. And I've been lucky enough that in 2017 I got to do a book called Everyone's an Alien When You're an Alien Too, and it was pitched. I kind of pitched it as like just like cute cartoon book. And when I got the chance to do it, I realized like this is my one chance to sort of take everything I've been talking about, all the stuff I've learned about the internet and all of my experiences around online spaces, and try to condense that and distill it into like this expression of a book. And one of the canonical tweets that I've been thinking a lot about in terms of like what place is and what Twitter is by this user, Linzita. On Twitter, it's like I'm reading 300 books at once, but the books all know about each other, and the characters show up in all the other books. And that sort of became like this earworm in my head, and I started thinking about how you can do a book by adapting the narrative structure of like the social media timeline, and adapting it into the format of a book, right? Because the timeline is this narrative structure that maybe is a bit new, right? And it's not, like if I were to take a children's book from 50 years ago, you'd have chapters, right? You'd have Winnie the Pooh meets Tigger in one chapter, and Winnie the Pooh kind of has an adventure with Eeyore in another chapter. And I thought, like, what if we kind of break all those chapters up and get these updates instead, and kind of follow this narrative structure of the timeline? And so I wanted to show you the first kind of 20 pages of the book without text, just to get a sense of that rhythm, and try to show you what I was trying to do with the book in terms of the structure. And so it's like, it is really this like kind of metaphor of a new user joining social media and following a bunch of other users. So there's this alien who comes to Earth and meets all these different characters and kind of follows them and sees all their little interactions. And sort of once you get this cast of characters, you start to see them kind of pop up again and again, and you see their updates sort of interspersed with everyone else's. That's like when a user gets suspended. And yeah, and so this becomes sort of this this rhythm of like this narrative structure of the timeline, and of all these characters, and then they sort of talk to each other. This is like an @mention where you have two people fighting, and then you get all these you get these kind of nice updates, and that's kind of the first section of the book. And the cool thing about the book is also it's ostensibly a Trojan horse, right? Like I wanted this book to be a cute book, a really deceptively simple one that you could pick up and be like, oh, I wonder what this is. But really it's a book about sort of all the stuff that I care about. It's a book about an immigrant and centers the experiences of an outsider. It celebrates diversity and difference. And hopefully it opens up a discussion about mental health, because I took a lot of the stuff I learned with like the Wholesome Memes and with tweeting about that stuff honestly and put it into this book. And it's also this thesis about seeking community in online spaces and in social media. And I think I was able to distill all of that into this little cute thing. And that's sort of my pitch of, for everyone who's making stuff out there, is to take the things that you're experiencing and thinking about online and translating it into your work and into different forms and into different mediums. And as a closer, I just wanted to say again that online work is legitimate, right? Because I think we're still in this phase where people hear like, oh, you're an internet creator, and then they're like, oh, well, that's not a real thing. And it is a real thing. It's a legitimate thing. And when we're online, we're writing, we're playing, we're creating, we're testing things out, we're figuring out who we are, we're sharing experiences, we're still shitposting. But through this, we're building community all the time. And I think as people living this experience in online space, it's our role to just sort of reflect those lived experiences. And it's our role to create work around the internet and on the internet and about the internet as honestly and openly as we can. So that's all from me. Thank you.